everyone, and I hope you're doing well. Today we have a updated Kashtira Heatsoul decklist after the ban list, and I can prove it works because we won this little thing here. Now, we went undefeated at locals against some meta decks after the ban list. We went against Tempai, Melodious. There were a couple decks there. I think we went against Stun as well, but I don't really count that one. But I'm here to show that the Kashtira decklist can still work, and this is my build that took me to win this lovely little prize. Now, I believe this has Swords of Revealing Light and Doom Calibanite in there, of a unique rarity, but you know what? That's going to stay in the envelope. I don't really need those cards. I need the cards that are in my deck, which is what I'm going to show off now. So this deck list is a little bit spicy. There's a couple of techs in there that I really like. So first we're going to start off with the Handtraps. Now, Kashtira Heatsoul is known for playing a lot of different Handtraps, but I'm playing a little bit of a different build, mainly because we're running this card here, this Crossout Designator at 3. Now, this should explain some of the choices coming up, and honestly, I can't not play this card. I think it's my favorite card ever printed. It's a very, very cool card. I love the design, but there are a couple one-offs in this deck and the side deck that specifically we need Crossout for. And not to mention, in Kashtira, you can use Crossout to extend your plays. You can cross out a Kashtira monster and special summon it off of Birth or the trap card, but usually that's not the case, but technically it's an extender as well. But for the hand trap lineup, other than Crossout Designator, I guess that's not technically a hand trap, we have 3 Ash Blossom. Now, Ash Blossom is to be expected. I mean, it's a staple of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And unfortunately, we can't go into Barone anymore. We used to be able to summon this with A7, but it's really good for catching out choke points of decks. And I know people say, oh, you don't just put Ash Blossom in because it's good. It's good against every deck. Like, almost every single deck you can play into, play an Ash against it and it will hurt them. So almost definitely we'll be running 3 Ash. Not to mention Crossout, you're going to get Ashed at some point. We also run the obvious 3-dimension shifter. I don't know how this didn't get banned on the ban list. I know there's lots of complaints about that, but as long as it's not banned, we're going to be running it. It's a disgusting card, and against some decks, it just kills their turn. And against others, well, we side them out into other cards in our side deck that are more useful. But it hits like 50% of decks you go against, so you've got to run the shifter. And we also run 3 Infinite Impermanence. So this is a very basic hand trap lineup. Infinite Impermanence, obvious really. Good for your Crossout. Good for just playing the game. And for the last hand trap, we do have 1 Nibiru. Now, I really don't like Nibiru in cash, mainly because it gives you a Nibiru monster card, and you can't special any Kashtiras while you control a monster, which is a bit of a shame. But the reason it's here is for the Crossout. It's not for actually using Nib. I mean, granted, you can use Nib. It's not a bad thing to use. I mean, there's a reason it's a staple, but it's mainly here for the Crossout. If you see it, you're not the most happy, but it's not like a complete brick like some Crossout cards. Next, we're going to go over the engine that we run. Of course, we run 3 Kashtira Fenrir. This card is insane. Again, I think it's the TCG is the only format where this hasn't been hit in some capacity, and Fenrir is just awesome. It's a really, really good card, really versatile, and it gets you into your other Kashtira monsters. Speaking of, we have 3 Kashtira Unicorn. This is your 1-card starter. You grab your Birth or Theosis, depending on what you have in hand. I think pretty much if you have Fenrir or Right Heart in your hand, you're going to be grabbing Birth, because you can, like, extend your plays without having to lock yourself into XEs for the Heatsoul line. But sometimes you do get a bit desperate and you go for Theosis, or you go for the OTK where you Theosis into the Scarecrow Kashtira, which we also run 1, but we'll come to that shortly. We also run 2 Rise Heart. Now, without a Rise Heart, I don't think we need 3. This card is good. It can extend your plays quite well by banishing a Kashtira monster or possibly Theosis to add something back to your hand, but I don't want to see it every game. It's not amazing when we don't have a Rise Heart. It does get you into another 7, but I don't think you need 3, but you can run 3 if you really feel like it. It is a bit more consistency, don't get me wrong, but I think being hyper consistent versus having different options, I think there's a good balance there, and I think 2 is the way. And of course we have the Heatsoul Kashtira. This card destroys Tenpai. If you don't know, on declaration of attack of any Kashtira monster while this is face up on the field, it negates the effects of the monster that it's battling with till the end of the turn. So anything you battle into will get negated. Versus Tenpai, if they attack into you, they get negated. So you pretty much just stop their plays. And summoning this either off the Shangri-Era or the Theosis is insane. Like, I love this card to bits. I would even be tempted to run 2, but like, it's a bit rough in the hand unless you have a Theosis engrave or something to capitalize of banishing, like a birth. So I run one of those. And we also run, for the last Kashtira monster, 1 Kashtira Ogre. This is a key part of the OTK, going under 4 summons. So you have to keep him in, plus we run the trap. It is a very good trap against some decks specifically. And it's 2800 attack. I mean, that's massive. Another thing is the effects. To look at the top 5 cards, or between 1 and 5, and banish one and return them in any order can be amazing. If your opponent bricks or is looking for a specific out, then summoning this is not a bad idea, because you can just stop them from drawing into the out, or at least the out that you won't expect. At least you'll know exactly what to go into. Saying that, my memory is absolutely terrible, so take from that what you will. Next we have the Kashtira kind of spells and traps. We have 3 birth. This card is absolutely insane. It's basically full combo. If you've lost your board, you can just summon something from banished or grave, grab a Fenrir, grab a unicorn, just go full combo from there. And yeah, this card is nuts. You can't not run 3 of this. You want to see this as much as possible. And we also run 3 Theosis. Now, it can be argued that you run 2 of these, similar to the Rise Heart, but I think it allows you to OTK too often, and the value you get out of this is nuts. It's a bit of an Ash bait, but I think it's worth running. It gets you into your plays so much quicker. Unfortunately, it does lock you out of the Heatsoul line, so if you're planning to link into Heatsoul, unfortunately, you'll need to skip on the Theosis at least till the end of your linking, because it locks you into Xyz going forward. But the value you can get off this is nuts, and mainly another reason we run 3 is because we want to banish it. If we're using Rise Heart and we've got something in banished and we banish the Theosis, just add it back. You know, it's not cheating, it's in the game. So yeah, I think that's a good reason to run 3, honestly. Of course, we run 3 of the Pressure Planets as well. Now, this is the last of the Kashtira spells, and honestly, this is probably one of the most insane. Being able to pop something, as well as the attack boost, is really useful. The pop is one of the most useful effects, because it's a piece of removal that Kashtira doesn't usually have in its monsters. With its monsters, you're banishing a lot face down, but you don't typically get to pop something. But this turns Shangri-La not only into a special summon, not only into a zone lock, it turns it into a pop as well. Now that is a good card. And not to mention, we have a little bit of a spicy tech, which helps us get into this a bit easier as well. Now that spicy tech is set rotation. Now, if you don't know, set rotation is at 1. I would love to run multiple copies. This card is nuts. Now, how this card works is you take 2 field spells from your deck, you set 1 on your side of the field and 1 on the opponent's side of the field. Now, the key part of this is that neither player can activate field spells until one of those cards is either destroyed or they're both flipped face up. And this basically gets you into either your pressured planet on your side of the field and give your opponent a bad field spell. And these are the field spells we run for set rotation in the main deck. So we have a Zombie World. Zombie World is very tricky to play around. It turns everything on the field and in the grave to zombies. Now this is crazy against Tenpai specifically, but against stuff like Melodious as well can be quite useful. Not to mention some of the graveyard decks need this, well, need stuff to not be zombies ideally, so it really trips them up. And especially with Kashtira Unicorn, if there are cards in your opponent's deck that require specific types, you can just ignore them while Zombie World's on the field. And you can just banish the ones that are generic. So you can basically lock them out of the extra deck in some way. It's a very funny card, and you're honestly not that sad seeing it in your hand, which is why we run it in the main deck. Speaking of not so sad to see in your hand, we have a Necro Valley as well. Now, Necro Valley obviously kills some very specific decks. You have to be careful though. If you have Kashtira Birth and you plan on special summoning from the graveyard, make sure you don't activate Necro Valley, because you can't do that. You can special from Banish, that is fine, but Necro Valley pretty much shuts off the graveyard. So against some decks this is absolutely nuts, and we have a couple of field spells in the side deck as well that work very well, but this is what we've got in the main, not to mention the Pressure Planet as well. So in the worst case scenario, you can set rotation to grab your Pressured Planet and set one of these on your opponent's side. Now, they're probably not willingly going to activate it, but at least you've got a way to your Pressured Planet, or even into one of these if you don't need the Pressured Planet. Now, another bonus of set rotation is now that they've got a field spell on their side of the field, that turns off Imperm, evenly matched. I mean, that's pretty much it, but those are two big cards to turn off without them having to activate or destroy it. Specifically Imperm as well. Imperm is really nice to say, nah, you can't do that, mate. You've got a card on your field. And especially when your deck folds to an Imperm sometimes, if you draw a Unicorn and a rubbish hand, it's good to rule that out. So I think set rotation is very spicy, and I do think it's worth considering. It's a very, very funny card. And when we get to the other field spells in the side deck, I'll show you and the reasoning why. But we have the last of the generic spells here. We have our newly limited Pot of Prosperity, Shed a Tear for consistency. Now, I was thinking about playing another Pot of Desires, but honestly, a personal opinion, I don't like Pot of Desires. Not because it's a bad card, I think it's a really good card, but I feel like I play worse under Desires. I constantly forget what I've banished with Desires, so if you can play with Desires, I think it might be worth considering, but personally, I can't. And for another single card, we have Triple Tactics Talent. I mean, it's a good card. We do have Thrust in the side, so that's why we run one, and it's also a good cross-out target. And lastly, we have Terraforming. Not only can Terraforming be used for the Pressure Planet, it can now be used for Zombie World or Necro Valley as well, especially if you've already activated Planet. You can set up one of your like Necro Valleys or Zombie Worlds. So it's a lot more versatile than just running the fourth copy of Pressured Planet, which most of the time it is, but sometimes it's a floodgate. And for the last two cards, we have two traps. We have Rivalry of the Warlords. I saw this in a deck list a long time ago for Kashtira, and it genuinely makes sense. The only monster in our main deck that isn't a psychic is Riseheart, and we can do without him. You can make some powerful boards without him, and Rivalry wins games against a lot of decks. Of course, some it doesn't do anything against, so you side it out. But this, I mean, especially with the Zombie World as well, even against decks that it doesn't do anything against, sometimes it's worth keeping in for the Zombie World, because suddenly everything's a zombie, and unless they're playing zombies, which would be incredibly based, then they're in trouble. And for the last card of the deck, it's Kashtira Preparations. Yay, we're prepared. It's a good card. It's not amazing. It's not the best Kashtira card, but it does allow you to special summon from hand or banished, and that on your opponent's turn is nuts, because sometimes you just brick, but if you have an ogre and something in hand, maybe you can pull it through. But the spicy effect is when your opponent activates a trap card while you control a Kashtira, you can banish a card from their hand. I believe it's random, yeah. And that's just nuts. That's a nuts card against some specific decks. Playing against Burn with this card is very funny because you just remove multiple of their cards. But that is the last card in the main deck. Let's move on to the extra deck. Extra deck is pretty standard, I believe, minus the Appaloosa, which we usually run. Unfortunately, we have one Shangri Era. You won't usually need multiple, and you can special summon it if it's banished with the preparations. But considering how fast Yugioh is, we're probably not going into 2. We also have Dark Armed Dragon of Annihilation. Now, Dark Armed is an amazing card, especially against decks that you really need to pop cards against. Stun was a good one, and Burn, there's a lot of things that need popping rather than banishing face down if they're setting a lot. Not to mention this isn't once per turn, so you get 2 pops out of this. So, and a banish. The banish is nuts. You can banish Theosis, you can banish whatever you want. It can even further your plays with Birth, so it's probably one of the best cards in the extra deck. Of course, if we're running Xyz, we run Zeus. I mean, look at him, it's cool. Of course, we have Zeus's evil brother. We have Typhon. Now, the funny interaction with this deck is that Pressure Planet turns off Typhon because it gains 100 attack, and it becomes 3000, so you can no longer use its own effect, but everything is still negated, so it's still worth it. Next, we have the Dracosac line, which is kind of, you just go straight into Heatsoul. So you go Mecha Phantom Beast, which lets you detach 1, summon 2 tokens, turn those tokens into 2 Link Spiders, and then you turn those 2 Link Spiders into a Crystal Heart. Crystal Heart grabs back one of the Link Spiders, and then you go into a Heatsoul. Heatsoul, you pay 1000 to draw 1, and from there you can extend with Fenrir or the Heatsoul Kashtira to usually go into an IP Masquerader, or you can just sit on Heatsoul and a couple of Kashtira monsters. And to summon off of IP, we also have a Little Knight and an Underworld Goddess. Now, Underworld Goddess is an interesting one. That is our replacement for Appaloosa. I do miss Appo. It hasn't come up yet, but then I haven't played many games with the deck. I think it could be replaced with another Dark Armed, but I think we need something else other than SP to go into off of IP. So that's my choice, and it's never a bad thing to have the white lady, the white woman. We have 3 other cards. Harmonizing Radio I loved in the previous meta, but I don't know how I feel about it right now. I think it's still really good against Snake Eyes, but I think I'd rather have Kashtira monsters, so I'm unsure about keeping this one in, but it is a very good card. We have, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but it's Big Eye, just steal a monster. Always going to be good. And we have our time card, Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon. Basically just burns for 500 every time your opponent breathes. So if you're going into time, you can make one of those, or just swing in battle phase. That's usually what I end up doing, but you never know. Moving on to the side deck, last but not least, the side. Now, there are a couple cards in here I would change, but these I would not. We have 3 Cosmic Cyclone. This is super good this meta, and I still think it is really, really good. Against a lot of decks, it's just a great piece of interruption, especially going first. It's good against Tenpai as well. That is like my one true enemy, Tenpai, at the moment. So I'm glad I can counter them. We have 2 Triple Tactics Thrust. The reason we don't run 3 are mainly just ratios, because you don't always want to put in the Thrust against some decks. It's sometimes it's not going to be live. Sometimes the cards you search for Thrust aren't going to be useful in the matchup, or you just want to hard draw into them without playing into negations. But these are our targets for Thrust. We have a Harpy's Feather Duster. I mean, that's pretty much in every side deck, let's be real. It's good against a majority of decks. We have 2 Lightning Storm. Now, if I were to make any changes, I'd probably change one of these Lightning Storms for a Raigeki or a Dark Hole. Now, the reason being, not only are these thrust targets, they're also cross-out targets. Had a game today where this came up. Going first, you side in a Lightning Storm or a Harpy's Feather Duster or an evenly matched or all 3, but you keep your cross-outs in. And what that means is you can set your cross-out, and on your opponent's turn, when they go to clear your field, you just cross out their board wipe, and they're left crying. With the thrusts, we run 2 evenly, 2 D-barrier as well, so we do have pretty much everything you could want off of the thrust. There is another funny spicy tech coming up, but these, I mean, evenly matched is evenly matched, and you're going to cross out it half the time, but evenly matched, if you can pull it off, is evenly awesome. Great card, and I don't think it's getting banned anytime soon. I think it's one of the few cards that going second have that are really good. Now, here we have some spice. The spice, we're cooking. We have a metaverse. What's that doing, you ask? What is that card? So it's just an inconspicuous card, 1 line of text. Take a field spell from your deck and either activate it or add it to your hand. Pretty standard. But you can search this off Thrust turn 1 and you can set it. And not only do we have the Necro Valley, the Zombie World, or the Pressure Planet if you're feeling really spicy, we do also have 2 other field spells that we can side into. We have a chicken game, newly limited chicken game from the previous list. It's funny. I'm not sure about good, but it's good against Tenpai specifically. You flip this during their battle phase, activate a chicken game, and all of a sudden they can only get 1 swing in and you're not taking any more damage. How beautiful is that? And honestly, I wanted an excuse to use chicken game. It's not great off of set rotation because you can just pay 1,000 to destroy it. So yeah, maybe you wouldn't be choosing it off that, but Metaverse and chicken game is funny. And for the last card in the side deck, you've probably seen this one before if you know what set rotation does. It's Gateway to Chaos. Now, the effect? You don't need to know the effect. It's useless effect, actually. It's worthless. You add a Black Master Soldier Ritual monster or a Gaia the Fierce Knight monster from your deck to your hand. Broken, right? I know, it's a crazy card. Why do we have this in here? For the set rotation. Essentially, because set rotation sets both cards, you give this one to your opponent. They look at it and start to weep. They start to cry, sob, in tears, because they can't activate it. Now what this means is, because they can't activate it, they can no longer activate field spells without destroying it. So they have to spend resources to destroy a card on their own side of the field, which is a lot harder than destroying a field spell on your side of the field. So almost all of the time, they're going to need to do something drastic to get rid of this. And because they can't activate it, it also makes it 100 times harder for your opponent to get rid of your Necro Valleys, Zombie Worlds, and Pressure Planets. So I think it's a win-win. The only problem is it's a hell of a brick. If your opponent can't activate it, you certainly can't. So that's the reason it's in the side. I think it's only worth putting in against decks that rely on the field spell. Tenpai, Runic specifically. Those are the 2 big ones that this is in for. So whilst I did have it in the main for a while, I hated seeing it, and at least with Zombie World and Necro Valley, I'm not too salty when I see them in my hand. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments, what do you think of the deck list? I've had a lot of fun with this deck list, especially with the set rotation. I think it's really spicy and it allows you to do some funny stuff. So I think it's one of my favourite deck lists yet, and I love Kashtira. I've been playing it for a long time. So let me know what you think. Anyway, that being said, if you made it this far in the video, please do feel free to hit subscribe. New Yu-Gi-Oh videos each week. And as always, happy dueling.